I thought I'd go off the beaten path a little bit today and tell you the story about two people who were instrumental in the design and construction of the Walt Disney World Resort. They are General Joe Potter and Admiral Joe Fowler. Both of them worked for the Walt Disney Company, and I'll tell you their complete story in a little bit. But I wanted to start where they ended. They are actually both buried here at the Woodlawn Cemetery in Gotha, Florida, which is just a few miles outside of Orlando. And it's interesting, this is an older cemetery and there's a lot of historical figures that lived here, people that lived in and around Orlando. And one of the people that's buried here, by coincidence, is Bob Ross, the painter. So kind of an interesting little side note there. But anyway, about their story. General Joe Potter was responsible for most of the irrigation system, sewers, canals, infrastructure work at the Walt Disney World Resort. Meanwhile, Admiral Fowler was responsible for basically the design and construction. He was the overall project manager. He ran Buena Vista Construction, he ran the WED Enterprises, and he also ran the construction company and was the main project manager. So he had a lot of influence and a lot of play in it. But both of them are the two people you would think of most closely tied to the Walt Disney World Resort. So come with me as I tell a story about who they are and what their responsibilities were, and a little bit more about their history and their connection with the Walt Disney World Resort. Likely one of the most important and sometimes overlooked architects of Walt's dreams, Rear Admiral Joseph W. Fowler. He graduated from Annapolis in 1917, second in his class, youngest at the time to graduate, and served in World War I as a navigator on the submarine patrol duty. He oversaw the design changes for warships, including the aircraft carrier Saratoga and Lexington. He supervised submarine construction and repair at the Portsmouth Naval Yard in Kittery, Maine, and took command of the San Francisco Naval Shipyard at some point. Now you may be asking yourself, what does Joe Fowler and his history have to do with Walt Disney? Well, somewhat chance encounter turned into an entirely new career, and a totally unexpected one at that. Who would have thought an admiral would become one of the most important pieces to the Disney theme park legacy? Walt contacted Joe Fowler and convinced him to join the construction team. He built Disneyland in a year. He had a wonderful way of cutting through red tape and getting the job done. But he also grew his relationship with Walt Disney into a friendship and a bit of a confidant. And more than anyone else, he could see Walt's vision. He called Walt Disney, quote, the greatest man I've ever known. He'd been hired in 1954 based on his reputation as Can-Do Joe. Bob Foster was chiefly responsible for land acquisition, but Fowler was involved in the site selection, traveling incognito to Florida, and to scout out for a site of the planned property. Ground was finally broken outside of Orlando in 1967. The Admiral was in charge of engineering and construction, and the park opened on schedule in 1971. Fowler was quoted as saying, "Walt didn't live long enough to see us break ground in Disney World, but he used to travel all over the property with me in a Jeep. He loved it. I remember he wanted to see how Disney World would look from the top of the Contemporary Hotel, so we got the biggest damn utility crane in Florida, and the two of us got into the bucket, and they hoisted us straight up to where the lounge at the top of the Contemporary would be. I was so damn busy hanging on, hoping to get down, and he was so enthusiastic. 'Oh, Joe, look at this. This is going to be great.' He could visualize it all. I could see enough to realize that everything in the plans was properly located. Oh my, he was a wonderful man." Like Disney, Fowler was a great believer in planning. Quote, "All my life, I've had the responsibilities where planning was necessary. I used to tell my staff when we were building Disney World and Disneyland, now remember this, we save more money with good planning than we do in efficient building. Planning is the important thing." At one point, Fowler held 3 different positions with Disney: Director of Construction for Disney's Buena Vista Construction Company, Senior Vice President of Engineering and Construction for the Walt Disney Productions, and Chairman of the Board of WED Enterprises, the former name of Walt Disney Imagineering. Frank Hubbard, president of the Hubbard Construction Company, was a neighbor and old friend of Fowler's, dating back to when Hubbard's company was a major player in the building of Disney World. Like others who worked closely with Fowler during those pressure cook days, he also understood what can-do really meant. Quote, "He'd call me, and I'd dash out there to Johnny's Corner at State Road 535. He'd tell me what he wanted done, I'd give him a schedule, and he'd jot down notes. The last thing he'd say, always, was, 'Can do.' That meant, 'Get out. I've got somebody else to see. Get this done as soon as you can.'" Along the way, I found this recording of Admiral Fowler, and I think it's kind of interesting. He tells a little bit about what it took to build the Walt Disney World Resort, so you can kind of see it and hear it in his own words.
We have no reason at all to doubt that we will open on 1 October 1971. Well, they'll find everything completed that we have planned for Phase 1, including the monorail and all of the ships on the lagoon, all of the shows in the theme park. There will be, of course, a number of projects that will have started, but which we do not expect to complete until Phase 2 or one of the succeeding years. And may I say, we believe the shows are greatly improved and much more sophisticated. I think probably the best example I can give you is A Small World. We first put the Small World in the New York Fair at an estimated cost of around $3.5 million. We put ostensibly the same show in Disneyland at a cost of $5 million. And here we are putting it in at a cost of an additional $3 million. So the show is improved and, as I say, more sophisticated. Well, the basic concept that the company has of an amusement park will be closely followed in the Disney World. We will incorporate all the lessons that we have learned in Disneyland, and of course we will maintain our very strong policies of safety, courtesy, and cleanliness. And even there, in the area of cleanliness, as you know, we have more sophisticated means of disposing of trash, as for example the AVAC system. So, in summary, I would say that it will be an improved attraction over what we have at Disneyland. Well, without getting into too much detail, we're trying to set an example in the state of Florida for clean air and clean water that comes out of our area, both as regards drainage and as regards the disposition of the sewage. Also within the theme park, there are a number of other major attractions which are notably improvements over what we have at Disneyland. As for example, the castle. The castle, as you doubtless have seen, is much more elaborate. It's higher, and furthermore, it houses a very excellent restaurant on the second story. In the case of Main Street, there we have substituted certain materials which, based upon experience, will be maintenance-free, fiberglass, and etc. Furthermore, on Main Street in the Disney World, the second stories are practical. We use those for offices. In Disneyland, they're merely supporting the facades that you see on the public sees in the street. In the case of the jungle ride, we have introduced the Cambodian ruins, which follows very closely, and after much research, the stories of the Far East. Yes, that follows the same theme of Disneyland. It's the turn of the century. You'll see the horse-drawn streetcars. You'll see the old variety store, the Emporium. You'll see the silent cinema and the penny arcade and the other things that were dear to the heart of many of our fathers and grandfathers. We probably should recognize that the Walt Disney World is far more extensive. It has not only a theme park, but it has many other attractions such as the large lake and the lagoon, the theme hotels, the Polynesian and the Contemporary, the rather large fleet that we'll have operating on those waters, including the two Osceola side wheel steamboats, which after a lot of research follow very closely the early steamboats, river steamboats in Florida. They'll carry some 200 passengers each. They'll have the old rocker arm propulsion, a single cylinder, and already we've had a tremendous amount of correspondence and interest on the part of people throughout the country. Then we will have 6 smaller steamers, the Voyageur class, which will carry about 40 passengers each. And we'll have a host of small sailboats and other watercraft, which I know that everyone will enjoy. Hotels, yes, this is a departure from anything that has been done before, inasmuch as the modular construction here is made of steel. And after it leaves the U.S. Steel Realty factory, it is practically completed with the exception of the interior of the carpet and the furniture. But all of the utilities are in place, and it's merely a matter of connecting up the wiring and the piping as the unit is placed in its position. The cost of Disneyland when we opened was approximately $17 million, although subsequently in the following 10 years we invested another $110 million. However, in the case of the Disney World, when we open, the construction costs will approximately $240 million. And added to that will be the cost of the hotels, and still further the cost of the drainage and the utilities provided by the district, which will probably total another $30 million.
He remained in Orlando with occasional trips to his home state of Maine. He'd hold what he called board meetings with his former colleagues, host parties at the Bay Hill Country Club, and attend fundraisers for his favorite charity, the Edgewood Children's Ranch. That Orlando Ranch is a residence school and counseling center for children from troubled homes. He passed away about 6 months before his 100th birthday and lies in an unmarked site in the Woodlawn Cemetery in Gotha, Florida. There are many nods all around Disney parks to Joe's contributions. In Disneyland, the docks across from the Haunted Mansion are named Fowler's Harbor. It also features a building called Fowler's Inn, and you can find his window along Main Street in Disneyland. In Walt Disney World, one of the ferries that transports guests from the Ticket and Transportation Center on the Seven Seas Lagoon to the Magic Kingdom is named the Admiral Joe Fowler. He was without question one of the most productive and knowledgeable men in Disney history. General William E. Potter was known as Joe by everyone. He was born just after the turn of the 20th century in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. During World War II, he directed logistical planning for the invasion of northern France, an operation nicknamed Red Ball Express. After the war, he served in Washington, D.C. as an assistant chief of engineers for civil works and special projects. In 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower appointed Joe to serve as the governor of the Panama Canal Zone. He was responsible for governing a community of over 40,000 people. Soon after his retirement, he was asked to become executive vice president of the 1964-65 World's Fair, charged with construction of the federal and state attractions. During this time, he met Walt Disney and impressed him with what he had pulled off in New York. As Walt was in the process of purchasing land in Florida, he offered Potter a job with the Walt Disney Company as its vice president of Florida planning. Potter said, quote, "It was, as I've described it before, a real Perry Mason. Bob Foster always came here through Kansas City, where he had family roots. All the mail and memoranda and things that had to do with the acquisition of the property went through Kansas City, so there would be no tag-ends of knowledge, having to do with the fact that some California firm was purchasing this property."
Their mission rivaling the best spy novels, he was acquiring land for a massive new theme park that would dwarf Disneyland.
Walt Disney's name was pretty well known to the general public.
The reason for such a large piece of property was that Walt had been sort of inhibited in his ideas of expansion because he only had 300 acres in California, and over 100 of that was parking lot. He wanted a place here big enough for future expansion and buffered from surrounding lands and activities. Many studies were done. They were made by an organization that Walt was instrumental in starting called the Economic Research Associates. They were able to focus on the routes that visitors took into Florida, and when they came to the state, where they stopped, how much money they spent, and all that sort of thing. It just seemed obvious that this was a very good site because of the pattern. Florida had about 16 million tourists a year. That rose to between 24 or 25 million in the late 70s. In his role, Joe oversaw construction of the park's entire infrastructure. This included underground utilities and sewer and power and water treatment plants that were considered revolutionary at the time. He also developed drainage canals for the entire property, which were known as Joe's Ditches. Joe moved to Florida shortly after being hired. First, he lived in a hotel near where the reveal happened. There's a whole story about him being in the hotel when he opened the Orlando Sentinel and read about We Say Mystery Buyer is Disney. And later, he bought a house in a community near the site of the parks. Joe Potter toured the site extensively to determine how the park should be laid out to make the best use of the existing features while maintaining the ecology and natural beauty of the area. Potter was an engineering and logistical planning genius by all accounts, which is why Walt Disney recruited the retired U.S. Army general to oversee the early construction of Walt Disney World in Florida. In this role, Joe ably guided the Herculean task of transforming 300 acres of Florida land into the Magic Kingdom. "It didn't take you long to realize that Walt was a beginner of things, not a finisher," Potter once said. He had a team of engineers literally clean the sand at the bottom of Bay Lake, the natural waterway near Fort Wilderness, because the water was brown and unusable, and he realized that wasn't going to work. As former president of Walt Disney Attractions Dick Nunis said of him in 1988, Joe was a man who Walt was very fond of. Without Joe Potter, there would be no Disney World today. And Potter once said of Disney, "In my life, I've only worked for two geniuses, Mr. Moses, who oversaw the 1964-65 World's Fair, and Mr. Disney. You could never say that won't work or there are too many problems. That would be a fatal flaw and ruined you in their eyes." Now, there are a couple of key things that Potter did which were remarkable in their own right. The first had to do with drainage. This was swampland, and he came up with an innovative means to drain everything toward the downtown Disney area. It ensured that the theme park and the surrounding areas all stayed dry. This was accomplished by creating runoff areas and using a series of waterways to help with that. And this was important for another reason, too. One of the things he learned from the Panama Canal Zone, where people were dying of malaria, was that if you let water just sit there, you're going to have a problem. He insisted to Walt, whatever we do, wherever there's water, we've got to make sure it's either running off or moving, because if it's just sitting there, you're going to have a lot of mosquitoes. In another quote, he said, "The major problem that we had to do in the district was to construct and install a system of water controls. Our system was based primarily on being able to let floods, when they happen or immediately, through a system of automatic gates, which would shut as soon as the flood had passed. Through the use of these gates, we were able to keep the groundwater at a level that it had before, so the root systems of trees would think that things were just as normal as they had always been." And that leads around to the second thing. The decision to dredge out the area between the parking area and the Magic Kingdom. This is what became the Seven Seas Lagoon. It allowed for more drainage, and the fill dirt was used to raise the Magic Kingdom about 12 feet above sea level. The result was that the servicing was done under the theme park, so you would never see garbage trucks or deliveries or anything else that distracts from the experience, and the water could run off to ground level. An engineer, Potter was determined to build an infrastructure for Disney World, including underground sewers, underground power, and water treatment plants, which many civic leaders termed impractical or futuristic. He said, "I went out there and got 3 crackerjack college professors to show me how to do it. And then I got me another professor to help put the utilities underground." That's just how it worked. The third thing that Potter did was his decision to move all of the support services to one area north of the theme park. It consolidated everything in one area and ultimately made servicing the theme park simpler and allowed for access where no one would see it. At the time of his second retirement in 1974, Joe was serving as the vice president for Epcot Planning and senior vice president of Walt Disney World Company. In this role, he was responsible for the construction, operation, and administration of the entire Florida project. He also served as the president of the Board of Supervisors of the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which was formed by the Florida legislature to provide the public services necessary for the tourist and residential population of Disney World. He said in an interview, "We were able to establish our own building department, develop our own building codes, establish our own zoning, and do all of the things that are normally done by a county. You must realize that at that time, Orange County did not have the facilities to examine plans for, let's say, a castle." And shortly after his retirement, he said, "Our major concern with Orlando had to do with the airport. In all candor, I'm hopeful that plans for a new airport at McCoy will do all the things that large numbers of tourists coming by air will require." Joe passed away on December 5th, 1988 in Orlando, Florida. Now, like his longtime friend, Admiral Fowler, he's buried at the Woodlawn Cemetery up in Gotha, Florida. As far as legacies that he's left, one of the ferries that transports Walt Disney World guests across the Seven Seas Lagoon, of course, is named the General Joe Potter in his honor. And you can find his name along Main Street in a window above the bakery in the Magic Kingdom. The Magic Kingdom probably would not have been built if it hadn't been for Admiral Fowler and General Potter. And they both had intriguing backstories and lots of things that happened to get them here. And these were second careers for them as retired people, but they really brought together something special. And because they got to know Walt along the way, it became a much more interesting and connected story. And you can find their legacy at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World.